For the gift of this day and for our community of spiritual nurture and compassion, we give great thanks. And let us begin by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith and of this First Parish Church community. As we light this chalice, may our many sparks meet and merge in the communion of heart and soul. So my friends, I will say the words of our chalice lighting, which Michael has executed beautifully for us. This is the mission of our faith, to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness to all that we must hold the whole world in our hands. Come, let's worship. So good evening, my friends, and Dustin will put me on spotlight here, unless I can spotlight myself. Hi there. So good evening and welcome to our annual Maundy Thursday, UU Maundy Thursday communion service. So for some of us here, the idea of a communion service may be a bit unsettling. A reminder maybe of a former faith tradition that we tried to leave behind. So let's take a moment this evening to remember the roots of the tradition of communion. I know them well, actually. When I was growing up, I was a Catholic, and as a little Catholic girl, for a long time, the biggest word I knew was transubstantiation. I was so proud of myself that I could say that. Transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is the traditional Catholic approach to communion. It's the belief that the bread and wine start out as just that, bread and wine, but with the blessing of the priest, the bread literally becomes Christ's body and the wine becomes Christ's blood. The word transubstantiation comes from trans, which means change, and substantia, those are Latin words, which means substance. So transubstantiation in the Catholic tradition means the substances of bread and wine were literally changed into the body and blood of Christ. But let's remember that Jesus and his disciples who sat around the table that Last Supper night, they were Jews. And ingesting of blood was strictly forbidden by Jewish law. Even rare meat is not kosher until all the blood has been salted out. So it's not very likely, my friends, that Jesus would have condoned even wine as symbolizing ingesting of blood. Even the language of him saying, "This is my blood," would have been problematic if he were referring really to his own, to blood. The Last Supper was indeed a Seder dinner, part of Passover. So let's take a closer look at the Passover practice. Passover, where the meat and blood of a lamb were offered to God out of humility and gratitude for the sake of atonement. The practice in Jesus' day was an offering of the actual flesh and blood of a lamb to God. An offering to lamb, a burnt offering, an offering to God. And the way that one could obtain, the only way that one could obtain the meat and the blood of a lamb at that time was through the temple priests. And folks had to buy this blessed meat through the temple priests. In the ancient Jewish faith, people had to purchase these important items from the temple priests who were believed to have purified them. Do you remember that scene in the Bible where Jesus goes into the temple and he sees all the money changers selling stuff, and he gets really angry and he overturns the tables and he drives everyone out from the temple? Well, these money changers were actually selling the priests' blessed meat and blood for the Passover offering. That's what Jesus was so upset about. Because Jesus believed that each person should be able to offer their own offering directly to God without the commercial venture of the buying and selling that was going on in the temple. There is that great scene in the Bible, and I love it. It's been depicted many times in art throughout the ages, where Jesus does turn over the tables and he tries to drive the money changers But Jesus was not at all that successful. So I think that he had to get even more subversive in the Passover Seder at the Last Supper. He added something that would change everything. Jesus was thinking, hey, if those bigwigs insist on selling us what we want to offer ourselves to God, we will have to do something about it. So I think maybe the scene at the Last Supper really went like this. I propose this to you tonight, my friends. Jesus picks up some bread from the table and says, this is the flesh that we can offer to God. And then he takes his glass of wine in the goblet and he says, this is the blood we can offer to God. So I think maybe Jesus was telling his followers, the Jewish chief priests and the Pharisees might insist on trying to make it all a money-changing operation, but the bread and wine will be enough. The food we have in front of us will be enough, because it's the heart, the human heart, that matters the most anyway. So, my spiritual friends, perhaps at the Last Supper, Jesus was not talking literally about his own body and blood being offered, but he was saying that the bread they were eating and the wine they were drinking, they were enough. Adequate stand-ins for the flesh and blood of the lamb that normally had to be bought and offered during Passover. My spiritual friends, the communion service that we all celebrate comes from this liberal way of reframing communion, which I believe actually was exactly what Jesus was doing on that Last Supper night. Like most Unitarian Universalists, I believe the communion is a metaphor, not a literal act of changing of substance. And the true meaning of what Jesus was trying to teach us all at that Last Supper was this. We need one another. We don't need the priests and the Pharisees, but we need each other. What Jesus was saying to his beloved friends on the night before he died was always take care of each other. Always remember that everyone is invited to the table here. Always remember we need one another to survive. And when I am gone from you, do this in memory of me. For wherever two are gathered, I am there. When they're gathered in compassion and acceptance and love, I am also gathered with them. And somehow, when I do play that tape that I think of as the Last Supper, when I play that tape in my head, I always have imagined that at the end of his little speech, Jesus ended with the two words that I think are some of the most beautiful words in the Hebrew text, l'chaim, to life. So my friends, I hope you enjoy this Unitarian Universalist communion service. And remember that it's a metaphor in our tradition. It's not literal. It represents our beloved community at First Parish. We are even going to the extent of having communion service in this digital environment because we know how important it is to be together. And I'm glad that I could be with you at the beginning of the service. I have to leave at this point. I know that those of you who live in Duxbury know that we have endured some incredible anti-Semitic incidents in the last week and a half. And there is a gathering for the Jewish community on the South Shore, and I've been invited to be one of the co-facilitators holding the Jewish community in this space for the next 90 minutes or so. So I hold you folks in my heart as I travel digitally to this space for the Jewish community. But how perfect that it all intersects. This is Passover in the Jewish tradition. This is the Holy Week in the Christian tradition. And I think the bottom line lesson is that we, as Jesus said on that night, we need one another. We need one another literally to survive. So be well, my friends, and l'chaim.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to our first ever Zoom Maundy Thursday service. Please know that whoever you are, wherever you may be on your spiritual journey, for this time you are part of this one gathered congregation, and you are welcome here. I'm Michael Gardner, a worship associate here at the church, and as I often do around this time, I'd like to call attention to my tie. It's originally belonged to Robbie Walsh, who was our minister emeritus, and it was given to me by his widow, Kitty Ward. I wear it in memory of Robbie, and so that he can in some way be a part of this service. Our thanks to our worship associates, Pat Slechta and Jim Hamilton, for helping out tonight, and of course our music director, Edwin Swanborn, and Mr. Tech himself, who you won't see, Dustin Fleming. Our service is divided into several brief parts, and near the end, we'll feature some of our seldom seen 18th century silver. At that time, there will be a sharing of bread and wine, or juice, if you prefer. Tonight, unfortunately, you'll have to supply your own, so we suggest that if you haven't already, please take a moment at some point to secure some bread and wine or juice to have handy for later in the service. And now for the invocation. Spirit of justice, way of love.
Forever absence, forever full.
We come to this table in the midst of our community
to partake of your presence through the fruits of the earth.
To share hope by the work of our hands.
To reap a harvest everlasting in the human heart.
To fill our emptiness where we hunger.
To empty our fullness where we overflow.
Let us be servants of life abundant.
With equity and peace for every child of the creation.
Amen.
Amen.
And now Pat and Jim will read our confession.
Despite our glory, we are yet frail, creatures bound to history and place, subject still to flesh and soil. Let us speak to one another our common struggle to be whole.
Before the wonders of life, we acknowledge our failures to see and to revere. Before the sanctities of life, we are ashamed of our disrespects and indignities. Before the gifts of life, we confess that we have chosen lesser goods. And here today, seek the gifts of the Spirit. Before the heroisms of life, we would be inspired to new devotion.
The next part of the program is the covenant, a portion of which we will say together. So if you please, will unmute yourselves. I'll read the first part, and then we'll all say the words that appear on the screen together, hopefully at my signal. We are mindful of truth, ever exceeding our knowledge, and love, ever exceeding our practice. Please.
Reverently, we covenant together, beginning with ourselves as we are, to share the strength of integrity and the heritage of the Spirit in unending quest for meaning and wholeness.
We've come in the time for our service, for the sharing of joys and concerns. Before we consecrate the bread and wine, let us reflect on the nature of work, the value of labor, and how we think of those who toil to make all these things possible. How our feelings and appreciation of these workers has evolved and deepened over the past year. And now, the consecration of the bread. Spotlight that. The bread is broken and shared in remembrance of all who perform the hard work of this world, and by their labors make the path of life easier. And in remembrance of those we have lost this year.
For those who till the soil and those who farm the sea, and for those who transport and deliver the necessities of life to our tables.
For merchants and managers and those who fabricate the goods of life.
For those who serve behind counters and those who work in factories.
For those who operate our ships and drive our trucks and run our trains and fly our planes.
For those who delve in the mines and tunnel beneath rivers and mountains, and those who keep open the lines of communication.
For those who guard our towns against lawlessness, and our homes against fire, and our land against civil strife.
For those who bring us news from the ends of the earth, and those who bring us messages from friends far and near.
For those who work silently in laboratories that our lives may be richer, and those who watch over our health and safety.
For all those, wheresoever and howsoever it is given to lift a burden that our pack may be lighter, and whose bodies are broken for us, we consecrate this bread in thankful remembrance. And also in remembrance of Jesus, who was a worker and whose hands were rough with toil.
And now the consecration of the wine. The wine is poured and shared in remembrance of all those who give life its color and fragrance and texture, and infuse the world with spirit, and in remembrance of all those we have lost this year.
For poets and artists and writers, who kindle our imaginations and stir our thoughts.
For performers on the stage and screen who take us into the world of music and drama.
For teachers who enlarge our minds, and for preachers who enlarge our hearts, and for prophets who fire us with love of justice and make us servants of the common good.
For sages and saints who give us moral counsel, and for friends who give us courage.
For those who make us laugh, and for those who make us sing and dance for every joy.
For fathers and mothers who fill our days with loving kindness and our nights with watchful protection.
For all those wheresoever and howsoever it is given to pour out their spirit in faith, that we shall appreciate the gift and use it to make our lives richer. We consecrate this wine in thankful remembrance, and also in remembrance of Jesus, who was a poet and whose soul was aflame with divine fire.
At this point, during a live service in the chapel, while Edwin was playing, the worship associates would pass among the congregation, and each member would pull a piece of bread from the loaf and dip the bread into a vessel of wine, a form of communion known as intinction. This is certainly a ritual we hope we can perform next year with all of you in attendance. But this evening, while Edwin is playing, we suggest that you secure your bread and wine or juice and hold it as you contemplate all of the labor, all of the energy derived from the sun in so many forms, all the energy and labor it has taken to create and bring this bread and wine into our homes. And after Edwin is finished, please dip your bread into your wine and bite off a comfortable sized piece. Let it sit in your mouth for a few moments as our prayer begins. Then we suggest you chew oh so slowly, noticing everything going on in your mouth as the bread changes, giving off the essence of life, giving wonder, moving from solid to near liquid before you swallow, mindful of all of the effort, all of the miracles it took to create this sustenance for us. You should chew slowly because the prayer is kind of long. Spirit of life, Spirit of justice, way of love, source of wonder, path towards wholeness and meaning. As we taste the fruits of the labors of so many, as we convert the power of the sun to sustain our lives and help to create and nurture new life, grant us the wisdom to use this power with caution, with care, in ways that honor and protect all living things, in ways that sustain our fragile planet, uplifting the most vulnerable among us, our fellow humans and creatures, great and small. As we savor this bread and wine, let us remember the great gift of life, which we have graciously accepted. As we receive it in gratitude, may we eagerly accept and embrace the obligation to use this gift well towards the broadest understanding of the common good which it is within our power to perceive. Let us ponder on this for a while, and as we finish our bread and drink the last of our wine, these God-given gifts. May it be so. Amen. Our closing words are these. Life contains many mysteries, not the least of which is why there is so much pain, why so many must suffer so. And yet we must acknowledge that life is a gift which individually we actually did very little to deserve. So let us take this gift and use it to the fullest, to relish being, while working to reduce pain and suffering in ourselves and others for as many days as we have left on this precious earth. May you be blessed. Now go and be a blessing to the world. Amen. Thank you so much for attending this evening. I can think of nothing that would make many of us happier than if all or most of you showed up in person next year and you could see how it's done and experience the bread that is specially made for this service by Nancy Landgren. Please stay for Edwin's postlude. Thank you again.